Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we're exploring a question that has haunted human consciousness since the dawn of reason itself. What lies ahead in the path that stretches before us? Can we know what the gods have already written? Can we see beyond the veil that separates the present moment from all that is yet to come? The ancient Greeks were obsessed with this very question, consumed by it in ways that shaped the decisions of kings and generals, that sent armies to war or kept them at peace, that directed the flow of gold and shaped the course of empires. They built temples dedicated to prophecy. They consulted priestesses in trance states, their voices trembling as divine knowledge poured through them. They sacrificed animals and read the patterns of blood and organ. They watched birds wheel through the sky and interpreted every movement. They slept in sacred temples, waiting for gods to appear in their dreams. They even ventured to the edges of the underworld itself, seeking to question the spirits of the dead. Their search for the future was not born from mere curiosity or idle hope. It came from a deep and abiding conviction that the threads of fate, though invisible to ordinary sight, could be grasped and read by those who knew where to look. The Greek worldview was fundamentally different from our own in how it understood the future. To the modern mind, the future is a blank page waiting to be written, shaped by choices we make and events we cannot predict. To the ancient Greeks, the future was already woven into existence by powers far greater than mortal men could comprehend. The Moirai, the three fates, sat at their eternal loom, their fingers moving in patterns older than time itself. They were spinning, measuring, and cutting the threads of every life that had ever been or ever would be. Even the gods themselves could not escape what the fates had ordained. This was the bedrock upon which Greek divination was constructed. If the future already existed in some divine realm beyond the reach of ordinary perception, then it could theoretically be accessed, glimpsed, or at least partially perceived by those who approached it with the correct ritual, with the proper offerings, with the right frame of mind. The Greeks understood prophecy not as an attempt to change the future, but as an effort to align themselves with what was already destined. To know one's fate was not to control it, but to meet it with dignity, with eyes open, with the kind of acceptance that transforms tragedy into nobility. The landscape of ancient Greece came to be dotted with sacred sites dedicated entirely to this singular purpose. From the northernmost regions, where mountains touched the sky, to the islands scattered across the Aegean Sea like jewels cast upon blue water, Greeks of all stations made journeys to these temples and sanctuaries. Kings and beggars walked the same stone roads toward the same oracles, the same priests, the same ancient methods of seeking divine counsel. Generals consulted seers before battles, wanting to know whether the gods favored their military ventures. Merchants sought guidance before embarking on sea voyages, fearful of tempests and pirates. Lovers asked whether their passion would be returned. Parents wanted to know what fate had in store for their children, whether they would prosper or suffer. The wealthy brought gold and precious offerings, gifts so magnificent that they would still be visible centuries later in the remains of the sanctuaries. The poor brought what they could afford, simple offerings made with no less sincerity. And the priests, the priestesses, the seers, and the diviners stood ready to interpret the will of the gods for anyone who came seeking answers. But prophecy in ancient Greece was not a single unified practice operating according to one set of rules. It was instead a complex ecosystem of interconnected methods and techniques, each one operating according to its own particular logic, each one appealing to different gods and goddesses, each one requiring its own specialized knowledge and training. There was the grand oracle at Delphi High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where priestesses fell into trance states and spoke in cryptic utterances that priests later translated into poetry. There was the ancient sanctuary at Dodona in the mountains of Epirus, where the rustling of oak leaves and the cooing of sacred doves carried divine meaning. There were seers who examined the entrails of sacrificed animals, reading fate in the patterns of blood and organ tissue. There were augurs who interpreted the flight of birds across the sky, understanding each direction and altitude as carrying profound significance. There were dreams and visions received in sacred temples dedicated to healing gods, where suppliants would sleep waiting for divine visitations. There were those who consulted the dead in temples devoted to that dark art, believing that the spirits of the departed possessed knowledge of what was to come. There were those who studied the heavens themselves, tracing the movements of planets and the positions of stars, believing that the cosmos itself was a kind of divine text to be read. And there were seers who read omens in the most mundane of occurrences, a sudden sound, an unexpected meeting, a chance word overheard in the street or marketplace. All of these methods coexisted, complemented one another, and together formed a comprehensive system through which the Greeks attempted to peek behind the curtain of time. This elaborate system of divination was not superstition in the modern sense, though certainly some elements would appear so to contemporary eyes. This was instead a sophisticated attempt to make sense of a world that seemed fundamentally unknowable, to impose order on chaos, to find meaning in what seemed random, and to believe that even in the face of catastrophe, one could possess at least the knowledge of what was coming. The Greeks built their entire civilization on foundations that included prophecy. They made decisions of state and war based on oracle responses. They created a religion in which the interrogation of the divine will was as important as any other act of worship. They understood the world as constantly alive, with signs and meaning, as a place where the gods communicated through multiple channels, where attention and proper interpretation could reveal the future's shape. The most famous and most prestigious of all Greek oracles was situated at Delphi on the southwestern spur of Mount Parnassus. There is no place on earth quite like Delphi, even in its ruins. When you stand there, the power of the location seems to press against you like a physical force. The sanctuary clings to the steep slopes of the mountain, and the landscape around it is both devastatingly beautiful and profoundly unsettling. Sheer rock walls rise hundreds of feet from the earth. Pine trees with gnarled roots cling to precipitous slopes. Far below, the Corinthian Gulf stretches out like a ribbon of metallic blue. The ancient Greeks who made pilgrimage to this place believed they were visiting the center of the world itself. According to their ancient mythology, Zeus released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth and ordered them to fly toward each other. Where their paths crossed in the sky, where they met in flight, that place was designated the navel of the world, the omphalos, and the eagles met at Delphi. The history of Delphi reaches back into mist-shrouded antiquity. During the Mycenaean period, more than 1,000 years before the height of classical Greece, there were small settlements here devoted to a Mother Earth deity known as Gaia or Dodona. The worship of Apollo was established much later, somewhere between the 11th and 9th centuries before the Common Era. But once it took hold, it transformed the sanctuary utterly and completely. By the 8th century, before the Common Era, Delphi was already renowned internationally for its prophetic powers. It was in the following century, the 7th before the Common Era, that the Oracle truly became a pan-Hellenic institution, a place where Greek city-states sent official embassies to seek Apollo's guidance on matters of momentous importance affecting the whole of civilization. According to legend deeply woven into Greek mythology, Apollo did not arrive at Delphi unopposed. The sanctuary was previously guarded by a monstrous serpent named Python, a creature sacred to Gaia's ancient cult and devoted entirely to the worship of the old Earth Mother. Python had guarded this holy place for centuries, keeping it hidden from the eyes of the outside world and from those who would seek to claim it. But when Apollo came, radiant and terrible, the god of light could not tolerate the darkness and chaos of Python's reign. A great battle ensued, one of the foundational conflicts in Greek mythology. The young god, bright as sunlight itself, confronted the ancient serpent in a clash that shook the very foundations of the earth. The fight was brief but decisive. Apollo's arrows, sharp as sunlight itself, found their mark again and again. Python fell, struck down by divine arrows, and the serpent's body decayed where it lay. Some accounts suggest it was left to rot in the sun, the smell of its decomposition mingling with the sacred air of the sanctuary. The site became known as Pytho, named for the dead serpent, and Apollo claimed the place as his own sacred temple and sanctuary. What does this myth mean when examined carefully and stripped of its legendary trappings? Many scholars argue that the legend of Apollo defeating Python reflects an actual historical event, the dominance of the Indo-European peoples who worshipped Apollo over the indigenous populations who honored the earth goddess Gaia or Dionne. The myth encodes a kind of historical memory, a story of religious transformation, and the supplanting of one culture's gods with another's. What we can say with certainty is that by the classical period, Apollo was undisputed master of the Delphic sanctuary, and his worship there was so central to Greek civilization that his oracle became the most sought-after prophecy engine in the Greek world. The physical space of the temple itself was built around certain architectural features that held profound significance for those who approached seeking prophecy. The Temple of Apollo was constructed on a site believed to have a deep chasm beneath it, an opening in the earth that the Greeks believed connected to the underworld itself, to the realm of the dead and of ancient knowledge. This chasm became central to the mystery of how prophecy was delivered at Delphi. At the heart of the inner sanctuary, deep within the temple, the priestess of Apollo, known as the Pythia, would enter a sacred chamber. There, according to the ancient accounts that have survived through the centuries, she would descend onto a sacred tripod positioned directly over this chasm. The tripod itself was an object of immense symbolic importance, a three-legged stand that some sources suggest was ornate and precious, crafted with gold or silver, carved with symbols of divine significance. In this chamber, the Pythia would prepare herself for her encounter with the god Apollo himself. According to the accounts that have survived, particularly the descriptions provided by Plutarch, who served as a priest at Delphi and witnessed the proceedings himself many times, she would fast for a period before the consultation. She would be ritually purified, bathing in the sacred Castalian spring, the waters that flowed from the mountain itself and were believed to contain divine power. She would drink from another sacred spring, the Cassotis, whose waters were said to have particular prophetic properties that would open her mind to divine truths. And then, so the sources tell us, she would chew leaves from the laurel tree, the sacred tree of Apollo. The laurel was believed to induce prophetic states and visions, the very plant that modern herbalists associate with the genus Laurus. What happened next was the moment toward which all the preparation and purification had been directed. The Pythia, having completed her preparations, would mount the sacred tripod. And then, according to the ancient texts, something would overcome her in a way that transformed her entirely. Vapors would rise from the chasm beneath the temple. These vapors, which the Greeks called pneuma, would escape from the earth itself and enter her body through the chasm opening. Modern geological research has suggested that ethylene gas, a known hallucinogenic substance, may have been emitted from geological formations beneath the sanctuary. The effect on the priestess was not subtle or quiet. The Pythia would begin to tremble violently. Her hair would stand on end, as if electrified by divine power. Her complexion would change, her face flushing or paling. Her eyes would widen in an expression between ecstasy and terror. Her heart would palpitate wildly, as if the god were entering her very being. Her bosom would swell as her breathing became rapid and irregular. Her entire body would seem to enlarge, to grow beyond its normal boundaries. She would begin to make sounds that were not quite human language, sounds that seemed to come from somewhere other than her conscious mind. these were groaning sounds, screaming sounds, utterances that seemed to emerge from the deepest wells of her being. To witnesses, the experience was simultaneously terrifying and thrilling, repulsive and magnificent in equal measure. This woman had been possessed by something not entirely of this world. She had become a vessel through which divine power was expressing itself. In this state of trance, the Pythia would utter prophecies, but what emerged from her lips was often fragmentary and disconnected, incoherent, or delivered in such an altered state of consciousness that the meaning was far from immediately clear. The utterances might be delivered in verse or in prose, in elaborate riddles, or in what seemed like apparent nonsense to ordinary ears. The words would tumble out rapidly or slowly in a kind of ecstatic speech that modern linguists might compare to glossolalia or automatic speech. The priests who attended her in the sanctuary, the sacred attendants and official interpreters of Apollo, would listen carefully to every single word that escaped her lips. They would note down what was said or hold it in their memories with extraordinary precision. They would attempt to decode the meaning of this strange utterance, to understand what the god was attempting to communicate through this altered priestess, and then, crucially, they would translate what the Pythia had said into something that could be delivered to the person who had come seeking prophecy. This translation process was itself an art form of considerable sophistication. The raw utterances of the Pythia, delivered in her trance state, would be crafted into elegant hexameters, the ancient Greek verse form that had been used to recite epic poetry since the time of Homer. The prophecy delivered to the petitioner would be polished, intentional, carefully constructed, and often bewilderingly ambiguous. This ambiguity was perhaps the most essential feature of the Delphic Oracle. The prophecies were crafted in such a way that they could be interpreted multiple ways, that they could seem to mean different things depending on the circumstances and what actually came to pass. This was not necessarily deception in the way we might understand fraud today, though certainly some critics suspected the priests of being clever manipulators. Rather, it seemed to reflect a kind of divine irony, a sense that the future itself was ambiguous and paradoxical, that fate could not be understood except in retrospect, when events had already unfolded, that the will of the gods operated according to logic that human minds could not entirely grasp. The priestess herself was a specific type of person chosen to fulfill this tremendous role. She was always a woman, and she was always over 50 years of age. This detail is significant in understanding how the Greeks thought about divination. The Greeks associated advanced age with wisdom and with a kind of removal from ordinary human concerns and distractions. An older woman would be beyond the concerns of sexuality and romantic entanglement, beyond the distraction of physical appetites that might cloud her connection to the divine. She would live apart from her husband, separating herself from the demands of family life. She would dress in maiden's clothes despite her age, maintaining a kind of sacred virginity regardless of whether she had been married during her earlier life. She would dedicate her entire existence to the service of Apollo and to serving as a channel for his divine will. The Pythia occupied a position of extraordinary power and influence in Greek civilization. When she spoke prophecies, she spoke with the authority of Apollo himself. Her words could shake kingdoms and alter the course of history. Her pronouncements could send armies to war or keep them at peace. Her declarations could overturn established political orders or validate them. Her words could make or break reputations. Kings and tyrants sought her counsel with desperation. City councils sent official embassies to consult her, treating her pronouncements with the utmost seriousness. The wealthy paid substantial sums for her wisdom, and because her pronouncements were often cryptic or ambiguous, susceptible to multiple interpretations, they could be interpreted to support almost any course of action. This made the oracle both tremendously powerful and extraordinarily controversial. One of the most famous accounts involves Croesus, the incredibly wealthy Lydian king whose name has become synonymous with riches. Croesus was prosperous and powerful, commanding vast resources and armies. He wanted assurance that military action against the Persian Empire would favor him and bring him victory. To prepare the ground, he sent lavish offerings to the oracle, gifts of such magnificence that they would be remembered for centuries. He made a rich sacrifice to Apollo, ordering his priests to build a fire and melt down a huge amount of gold, including a magnificent statue of a lion. Then he posed his crucial question. If he crossed the river Halys, should he wage war against the Persians? The response he received was crafted in the form of a prophecy. If Croesus crossed the Halys, the oracle declared, a great empire would be destroyed. Overjoyed, Croesus interpreted this to mean that the Persian Empire would fall to his forces. The prophecy seemed clear. The future seemed certain. He attacked. But the great empire that was destroyed turned out to be his own. When Croesus returned to Delphi to complain that he had been deceived and misled, when he returned seeking redress and retribution, the oracle essentially told him that he had misunderstood her words. The fault was his own for not interpreting her prophecy correctly. The oracle had spoken truth. A great empire did fall when he crossed the river. It was simply not the empire he had anticipated. The prophecy had been accurate in every particular, yet fundamentally misleading. The words operated according to a different logic than human expectation. This story, likely containing elements of historical fact wrapped in legend, illustrates a crucial feature of Delphic prophecy. The words were literally true. They would come to pass exactly as stated, yet they operated according to a kind of divine irony. They were prophecies that could not be evaded, that could not be prevented, but that could be wildly misinterpreted. To seek prophecy from Delphi was to risk such fundamental misunderstanding. To know what the oracle had said was not necessarily to know what would actually occur. Another famous prophecy involved Oedipus, the legendary king of Thebes. An oracle at Delphi had proclaimed that Oedipus was destined to kill his father and marry his mother. The pronouncement was absolute and unconditional. His parents, the king and queen of Thebes, were horrified by this prophecy. They attempted to prevent its fulfillment by ordering their infant son to be killed, to be exposed on a mountainside where wild beasts could devour him. But the child survived. He was discovered and raised in hiding, growing to adulthood unaware of his true parentage. Seeking to escape the prophecy, which he believed referred to his adoptive parents, he fled the city where he had been raised. On the road, he encountered a stranger in a quarrel over passage rights. He killed the stranger in anger and continued on. That stranger was his true father, the king whose blood ran in his veins. He came to Thebes and solved the famous riddle of the Sphinx, earning the gratitude of the city. As a reward for his wisdom, he was given the hand of the widowed queen in marriage. That queen was his mother. The prophecy was fulfilled precisely, perfectly, and inevitably, despite every attempt to prevent it, despite every sacrifice made to avoid it. These stories reveal something central to how the Greeks understood prophecy and fate. The future was fixed, immutable, unchangeable. Fate could not be altered. But knowledge of the future did not grant power over the future. Instead, it only deepened the tragedy of the human condition. To know what was coming and to attempt to prevent it was to ensure, through one's very efforts, that the prophecy would be fulfilled. The only proper response to prophecy was acceptance, not resistance. To struggle against one's fate was to rush toward it. The Delphic Oracle reached the height of its power and prestige during the classical period of Greece, roughly from the 5th to the 4th centuries before the Common Era. During this time, the oracle's influence extended across the entire Greek world and beyond. It was consulted on matters of state, war, religion, and law. City councils sent official delegations. Individuals traveled vast distances through mountain passes and across seas to reach Delphi and seek counsel. The sanctuary grew wealthy from the offerings left by suppliants and from the donations of grateful petitioners. Temples were constructed around the sanctuary. Treasuries were built to house the gifts of wealthy donors. The landscape around the sanctuary became filled with monuments and votive offerings, statues dedicated to Apollo and other gods, stone markers commemorating important events and answered prayers, and the accumulated evidence of countless pilgrimage journeys spanning generations. Yet the oracle's power did not derive solely from the supernatural authority of the Pythia's pronouncements. Political manipulation certainly played a role in how the oracle operated. The priests of the sanctuary were not merely religious functionaries devoted to spiritual truth. They were also savvy political operators who understood the nuances of Greek politics and were capable of crafting prophecies that would advance particular political interests. There are accounts of the oracle being bribed to deliver particular prophecies. Cleisthenes, one of the early democratic reformers of Athens, allegedly paid the priests of Delphi to deliver the same prophecy to all Spartan delegations who came seeking counsel, regardless of the actual question asked. The prophecy was that Sparta must free Athens from the rule of tyrants. By having this message repeated to the Spartans multiple times through the oracle's authority, Cleisthenes was able to influence Spartan foreign policy in favor of Athenian democracy. Whether or not this specific story is entirely accurate, it points to a broader truth about the Delphic Oracle and how it actually functioned in Greek society. Its power lay not only in supernatural revelation, but also in the skillful manipulation of ambiguity, the strategic deployment of sacred authority, and the careful interpretation of events to match prophecies that had been delivered. The priests who served the oracle understood human nature with considerable depth. They understood political factions and competing interests. They understood how to craft responses that would seem profound, that would appear to confirm what people already believed, and that could be reinterpreted to match events after they occurred. Yet to dismiss the oracle as purely fraudulent or purely political would be to miss something essential about how it actually functioned. The experience of the Pythia does seem to have involved genuine altered states of consciousness. The trance state was real. The utterances were not necessarily scripted in advance by priests seeking to manipulate. There appears to have been a complex interaction between genuine religious experience, the priesthood's political savvy, the ambiguous nature of language itself, and the human tendency to find meaning in unclear statements. The oracle worked precisely because it operated at the intersection of all these forces simultaneously. Far to the north, in the mountains of Epirus, stood another oracle that was older than Delphi, though less famous in later ages. The sanctuary at Dodona was sacred to Zeus himself, the king of the gods, and it represented a different approach to divination entirely. Dodona was the oldest oracle to be established in Greece. It reached back into antiquity so distant that the exact founding date is lost to time and memory. Herodotus claimed that Dodona was the first oracle, and while archaeological evidence suggests the dating may be more complex, there is no doubt that Dodona was ancient when Delphi was still young. Dodona was nestled in the mountains of northwestern Greece, far from the busy trading routes and coastal cities that dominated Greek civilization. It represented something more ancient and primal, more directly connected to the earth itself than the more intellectualized Apollo worship at Delphi. According to the historical accounts that have survived, Herodotus recorded a legend about Dodona's origins that involved a black dove. According to the story, this dove came flying from Egypt, from the oracle sanctuary of Ammon, carried on wings that defied ordinary explanation. The dove came to rest on an oak tree at Dodona and miraculously spoke in human speech. With a voice that was both divine and supernatural, the dove declared that there must be a place of divination from Zeus at this very location. Thus, Dodona was founded, and the voice that had commanded its creation belonged to divine revelation itself. The priestesses of this oracle were called Pleiades, which means gray doves, keeping alive the memory of this founding myth. The center of the sanctuary at Dodona was a massive ancient oak tree. This was no ordinary tree. It was believed to be a tree of extraordinary age, possibly many centuries old already when the classical Greeks were making pilgrimage to consult it. The tree was thought to be the physical manifestation of Zeus's presence on earth, the place where the will of the king of the gods could be most directly perceived and understood. The roots of the tree, according to the Greeks, reached down into the depths of the earth where the divine resided. The branches reached up into the heavens themselves. The tree was a bridge between the mortal and divine realms, a channel through which God and human could communicate across the normally impassable boundary. Around this central oak tree, a sacred forest of oak trees was maintained. The sanctuary grounds were kept in a state as close as possible to what was presumed to be its ancient state. The earth itself was sacred ground upon which only the ritually pure should walk. The waters that flowed from springs nearby were sacred water, carrying divine power. Everything about the place was suffused with divine significance. Priests of Zeus served the sanctuary. These priests were called the Seloi, or the Heloi, names that possibly derived from the ancient Pelagian language, referring to the Proto-Greek peoples who had inhabited the region before the arrival of the classical Greeks. According to Homer, the description of these priests was vivid and memorable. They were men who slept on the ground beneath the sacred oak tree. They were barefoot, never covering their feet with shoes, maintaining direct contact with the sacred earth at all times. They lived in a state of constant readiness to perceive and interpret the will of Zeus as it manifested through the sanctuary. The methods of divination at Dodona were fundamentally different from those employed at Delphi. They did not depend on a specific priestess achieving an altered state of consciousness. They did not require interpretation of natural phenomena in abstract form. Instead, they relied on the observation of very specific natural phenomena and the interpretation of signs manifested through the natural world surrounding the sacred oak. The primary method was the interpretation of the rustling of the leaves of the sacred oak tree itself. When the wind blew through the branches and leaves of the oak, the rustling sound was understood to be the voice of Zeus himself, speaking directly through the tree to those who could hear it. The priests would listen carefully to the quality of the sound, its rhythm, its intensity, the particular tones and patterns. These auditory phenomena would be interpreted as answers to questions posed by those seeking guidance. The specific meaning depended on how the rustling sounded, what kind of wind was blowing, the overall atmospheric conditions at the moment, and the nature of the question asked. In addition to the rustling leaves, the priests would interpret the cooing of doves that inhabited the trees of the sanctuary. According to the Greek sources, these were not ordinary doves. They were sacred birds associated with Zeus and deemed to carry divine intelligence. The calls of the doves, their behavior, when they called and when they remained silent, the specific pitch and pattern of their vocalizations, all of these variations could carry meaning. The specific pattern of their calls would be interpreted as responses to questions or as indications of the god's will. This aspect of the oracle likely relates to the founding myth, where the black dove from Egypt had announced the establishment of the sanctuary. The doves, through their continued presence and their ongoing vocalizations, maintained that original sacred communication, keeping the line of divine contact open. The priestesses of Dodona, known as the Pleiades, the name meaning gray doves, played a central role in the interpretation process. These priestesses were not in trance states, as the Pythia was at Delphi. Rather, they were skilled interpreters of natural signs, experts in reading the subtle meanings embedded in the natural world. They would listen to the rustling of leaves and the calling of doves and translate these natural phenomena into intelligible human language that could be understood and acted upon. Their expertise was learned through long training and dedication to the sanctuary. They understood the patterns of interpretation, the subtle variations in meaning, the complex symbolic language through which Zeus supposedly communicated with mortals. Additionally, the Dodona Oracle employed another mechanism for prophecy that added another layer to the sanctuary's power and mystique. Bronze vessels had been hung from the branches of the trees of the sanctuary. These were substantial vessels, crafted from precious bronze, each one decorated with symbolic designs. When the wind blew strongly through the sanctuary, it would cause these bronze vessels to knock against each other, creating a kind of metallic ringing or clanging sound. Some accounts describe these as resembling wind chimes, producing a musical cacophony of bronze sounds that would fill the sanctuary when conditions were right. The pattern of these sounds, when they occurred, which bells rang and in what sequence, was interpreted as another form of divine communication. The bronze vessels created a kind of acoustic sign language through which the gods could speak to those with ears to hear. Water also played a role in the divination at Dodona. There were sacred springs within the sanctuary complex, and the sound of water flowing from them, the murmuring of water over stones, the particular acoustic qualities of the flowing water, all of these were interpreted as potentially carrying divine significance. Additionally, consultants might observe the way water moved, the patterns of ripples on the surface of pools, or other water-related phenomena as they sought answers to their questions. The process of consulting the oracle at Dodona seems to have been somewhat different from the more formal procedures at Delphi. A petitioner would arrive at the sanctuary, having made the journey through the mountains of Epirus. They would bring offerings to Zeus, gifts that demonstrated respect and sincerity in seeking divine guidance. These offerings might be animals for sacrifice, precious objects, or foods. The petitioner would state their question. It might be written on a lead tablet, a small sheet of lead inscribed with the person's question using a pointed stylus. These lead tablets, some of which have survived to modern times, provide us with direct evidence of the kinds of questions people asked. They ask about marriage prospects. They ask whether a business venture will succeed. They ask for advice about family matters. They ask for guidance about traveling. They ask whether they should purchase a specific piece of property. The questions are often practical, grounded in the everyday concerns of ancient people. Once the question had been posed and the offerings made, the priests and priestesses would interpret the signs. Wind through the leaves, calls of doves, sounds of bronze bells, murmuring of water, all of these would be observed and interpreted. The priestesses would deliver the answer, translating the natural phenomena into human language. The response might be given in verse or in prose, in riddles or in direct statements. The petitioner would return home with the answer to their question. The sanctuary at Dodona endured for a remarkably long time, remaining an active center of divination through the classical period, continuing into the Hellenistic age, and even into the Roman period. Pilgrims continued to visit for centuries, seeking answers to their questions. The sanctuary accumulated wealth and prestige, similar to Delphi. Votive offerings accumulated, bronze plaques inscribed with thanks for answered prayers, statues of gods and goddesses dedicated to the sanctuary, gifts left by grateful petitioners who had received helpful guidance. Another method of divination that became increasingly important in Greek civilization was the examination of the entrails of sacrificed animals, a practice known as extispicy, with particular attention being paid to the liver, a practice called hepatoscopy. This method did not depend on religious officials achieving altered states of consciousness. It did not require interpretation of natural phenomena. Instead, it required systematic examination of the internal organs of animals that had been sacrificed to the gods, looking for signs and patterns that indicated the will of the divine powers. The practice had ancient roots in the civilizations of the Near East. Babylonian and Assyrian priests had practiced liver divination for centuries before the Greeks encountered this method. Hittite priests in Anatolia had systematized the practice and created detailed guides to interpreting the signs visible on animal livers. The Greeks, through their interactions with these Eastern civilizations, gradually adopted and adapted this technique. While it never achieved the universal prominence of the oracle at Delphi, it became a standard method of divination employed throughout Greece and remained influential for centuries. The practice of extispicy began with sacrifice. A suitable animal would be selected, most commonly a sheep or a goat, though other animals might be used depending on the question being asked. The animal would be brought to the altar and killed according to proper religious procedures. The death itself was not meant to be cruel or torturous. The animal was supposed to die quickly and without excessive suffering. Once the animal was dead, the body would be opened and the entrails exposed. The practitioners of extispicy would examine the organs, looking for particular signs and patterns that supposedly indicated the divine will. The liver received the greatest attention. To the Greek seers and to the practitioners of this art more generally, the liver was understood as the seat of life force and emotion, the physical location where the essence of a being resided. In looking at the liver, the practitioner was supposedly reading the very essence of the sacrifice, reading the will of the gods as it was expressed through the animal's body. The liver had a particular structure and appearance that could vary significantly from animal to animal. It might be large or small, pale or deeply colored, smooth or rough, intact or showing signs of disease or abnormality. All of these variations were interpreted according to an elaborate system of signs. But what the seers paid particular attention to were the abnormalities, the deviations from what was considered normal. A liver might have unusual markings or discolorations. There might be raised areas or depressed areas. There might be areas of disease or unusual texture. The liver might be missing portions that should have been present. Most notably, the seers looked for what was called the head of the liver, an important feature at one end of the organ. If this crucial feature was absent or damaged, this was considered a very bad omen indeed. The absence of the head of the liver could suggest that the gods were displeased or that some serious misfortune was imminent. The location of abnormalities was just as important as the abnormalities themselves. The liver could be divided into regions, each of which had particular significance. Some parts of the liver were associated with good fortune and favorable outcomes. Other parts were associated with misfortune and danger. An abnormality in one location might indicate success in war, while the same abnormality in another location might indicate disease or death. The seers had to understand the complex symbolic geography of the organ, had to know which signs meant what, and had to be able to integrate multiple signs into a coherent interpretation. The spleen and lungs were also examined, though they received less emphasis than the liver. The heart, the blood vessels, the gallbladder, and other organs might also be inspected depending on the particular method being employed. Some seers had systems that involved checking multiple organs sequentially. The liver was typically examined first, and if that provided a sufficiently clear sign, the examination might stop there. But if the meaning was unclear, the seers would move on to examine other organs, looking for corroborating evidence or additional signs. The practice required extensive training and specialized knowledge. A skilled seer would have studied for years, learning the symbolic language of organ interpretation, memorizing the patterns and their meanings, developing the ability to look at animal organs and perceive the signs that supposedly indicated the will of the gods. These seers occupied important positions in Greek society. During wartime, they were essential members of the military establishment. Generals would not lead their armies into battle without first conducting a sacrifice and having a competent seer examine the organs to determine whether the omen for battle was favorable. One of the most famous seers in Greek history was Calchas, who appears prominently in Homer's Iliad. Calchas served the Greek forces during the Trojan War and is described as having no rival in his ability to interpret signs. He is specifically noted as an augur, someone skilled in bird divination, but his abilities extended to other forms of divination as well. According to the epic, it was Calchas who identified the source of the plague that had afflicted the Greek army. When the Trojan priest Chryses was denied the right to ransom his daughter Chryseis from Agamemnon, the god Apollo had sent a plague to punish the Greek leader's disrespect. Calchas examined the signs, both through observation of birds and through sacrifice, and determined that the plague had been sent as punishment for Agamemnon's treatment of the priest of Apollo. Calchas declared that the only way to lift the plague would be to return Chryseis to her father. This prophecy was accurate, and when Agamemnon reluctantly agreed to the terms, the plague was lifted. Calchas was also the seer who proclaimed that the Greeks would need to sacrifice Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia in order to gain the winds they required to sail to Troy. According to the legendary account, the Greek fleet had gathered at Aulis to begin the voyage to Troy, but no winds came. The ship sat becalmed, unable to proceed. Calchas examined the entrails and determined that Artemis had been offended by Agamemnon and that the goddess demanded the sacrifice of his daughter as the price of the winds. This prophecy, if it had any historical basis, pointed to the kind of power that seers possessed. They could interpret the will of the gods in ways that demanded enormous sacrifices and upheaval, and their interpretations carried enough authority that kings and generals would obey, even when the demands seemed terrible. Many centuries after Calchas, at the siege of Tyre in 332, before the Common Era, the general Alexander the Great consulted his seer Aristander during the siege. Aristander performed a sacrifice and examined the liver of the sacrificed animal. He declared that the signs indicated that Tyre would fall within a day. Alexander trusted this prediction and pressed the siege with renewed intensity. The city fell within 24 hours of Aristander's prophecy, seemingly confirming the seer's ability to read the divine will through the organs of sacrificed animals. The practice of examining entrails served multiple functions beyond merely prophecy. It provided a way to divine the will of the gods before important decisions or events. It gave military leaders and government officials a formal mechanism through which they could seek divine approval for their intended actions. It also provided a kind of psychological reassurance. If the omens were favorable, people felt more confident. If the omens were unfavorable, they could reconsider their plans or perform additional sacrifices to seek to change the will of the gods. In this way, the practice of extispicy functioned as a kind of decision-making system that incorporated religious considerations into practical matters of state and war. If the seers who examined entrails could be understood as decoding a written text, reading the patterns on livers and organs as if they were divine writing, then the augurs who observed birds were instead reading a kind of celestial script. Birds moving through the sky, expressing themselves through flight and call, became understood as bearers of messages from the gods. The movement of a bird's wing, the direction it flew, the height at which it traveled, the specific species of bird, the pattern of its flight, and the sounds it made. All of these variables held meaning within the complex symbolic system that Greek augurs had developed and maintained. This practice, known as oionistic or bird visionship, was widespread throughout ancient Greece. Unlike hepatoscopy, which required trained specialists and formal procedures, augury could be practiced by various types of religious officials and could even be consulted by private individuals who had some training or knowledge of how to interpret bird flight. The system was less formal in some ways than the state oracles, but no less important in its influence on daily life and major decisions. The Greek system of bird augury was somewhat different from the more rigid Roman system that would develop later. While Roman augurs had a highly codified system with specific procedures, orientations, and interpretations, Greek augury seems to have been more flexible and locally variable. Different regions might have had different traditions, and different interpreters might have applied the system with varying degrees of formality. Yet certain core principles appear to have been nearly universal. The primary method of augury involved observing the flight patterns of birds. The augur would station themselves in a particular location and watch the sky. When a bird appeared, they would note several crucial pieces of information. First, which direction was the bird flying? The Greeks generally oriented themselves northward when interpreting auguries, which meant that birds flying to the right toward the east and the rising sun were generally considered favorable, while birds flying to the left toward the west and the setting sun were often considered less favorable or potentially ominous. The logic of this system apparently related to the association of the right side with the rising sun and new beginnings, while the left side was associated with the setting sun and endings. The height at which the bird flew was also significant. In general, birds flying high were considered a better omen than birds flying low. A bird soaring high in the sky suggested that the gods looked favorably on the enterprise in question. A bird flying low, close to the ground, might suggest difficulties or unfavorable omens. The specific trajectory of the flight was also noted. A bird that seemed to be descending might carry a different message than a bird ascending. A bird that flew in a particular pattern or made sudden changes in direction, all of these variations could carry meaning. The calls or cries of the birds added another layer to the interpretation. Different bird species had different vocalizations, and the particular sounds they made could be significant. A bird that called repeatedly or loudly might be sending a stronger message than a bird that remained silent. The quality and pitch of the call, whether it seemed to be a warning cry or a normal vocalizing, could influence the interpretation. The specific species of bird was crucial information. Different birds were associated with different gods and carried different meanings. Eagles, for instance, were sacred to Zeus and were generally understood as carrying messages of great importance, particularly relating to matters of power and governance. Ravens and crows had associations with Apollo and could carry prophetic significance. Vultures had their own meanings and interpretations. Hawks and falcons carried messages about war and conflict. The particular bird species observed determined what aspect of the question or situation the omen was relating to. The practice of augury was not limited to formal religious contexts. Warriors might read bird omens before battle. Travelers might observe birds to determine if a journey should proceed. Farmers might check for bird omens before planting or harvest. Merchants embarking on trading voyages would seek auspicious bird signs. Politicians making important decisions might consult augurs. The practice was woven into the everyday fabric of Greek life and decision-making at all levels of society. Among all the methods through which the ancient Greeks believed prophecy could come, perhaps none felt more intimate or more personally significant than dreams. While the oracle at Delphi was a destination one traveled to, while bird auguries required the presence of sky-watching experts, while animal sacrifices depended on trained seers, dreams came to the individual unbidden. They arrived without warning in the night, mysterious messages from a realm that seemed to exist between waking and death. The Greeks had a particular understanding of dreams that was fundamentally different from modern conceptions. To the modern mind, dreams are understood as the brain's processing of memories and thoughts during sleep. To the ancient Greeks, dreams were understood as communications from the gods, or from spirits, or from forces beyond the normal perceptions of waking consciousness. The Greek understanding of dreams incorporated several different categories and types. Some dreams were understood as reflections of the dreamer's current physical or emotional state. These were called enipnia. These were dreams in which a hungry person dreams of eating, or a person with a fever dreams of cold water. These dreams had a diagnostic function. They indicated something about the dreamer's present condition, but did not necessarily carry prophetic significance about the future. They reflected the dreamer's current reality rather than future events. But other dreams were understood as prophetic. These were called oneiroi, and they were understood as carrying messages about the future. These prophetic dreams could take several forms. Some were direct visions of future events. A dream might show the dreamer something that would literally occur exactly as depicted in the dream. Other prophetic dreams required interpretation, presenting symbolic images whose meaning was not immediately obvious, but required unpacking and analysis. A famous example from the Odyssey involved Penelope, the wife of Odysseus. She dreamed of 50 geese being killed by an eagle. Upon waking, she wondered what the dream meant. The answer, it turned out, was that the 50 geese represented the 50 suitors who had gathered in her household, seeking to marry her and claim her property, while her husband was thought to be dead. The eagle represented Odysseus himself. The dream was prophetic, showing her that her husband would return and would destroy these men who sought to harm her and take what belonged to her husband. The symbolic dream, the dream that required interpretation, seems to have been particularly significant in Greek thought. Many cultures have recognized that some dreams are literal, while others require decoding. The Greeks took this understanding seriously and developed elaborate systems of dream interpretation. Dream books that circulated in the Greek world cataloged specific symbols and their meanings. If you dreamed of water, what did that mean? If you dreamed of fire, of buildings collapsing, of flying, of being chased, of being naked in a public place, of encountering specific animals, all of these had meanings that could be looked up and interpreted. The Greeks believed that certain locations were particularly conducive to prophetic dreams. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing and medicine, were understood as places where the god would appear to sleeping suppliants in dreams. These healing sanctuaries existed at multiple locations throughout the Greek world, with Epidaurus being the most famous. But there were Asclepiae at Athens, at Kos, at Corinth, at Pergamon, and in many other places. People suffering from illnesses or injuries would travel to these sanctuaries seeking healing through divine intervention in dreams. The process of seeking healing through dreams was called enkoimesis, or incubation. The term enkoimesis is sometimes translated as incubation, a metaphor suggesting that the person was incubating healing within themselves through sleep. The process began with ritual purification. The supplicant would bathe in sacred waters. They would make offerings to Asclepius and other healing deities. They would perform sacrifices. Then, typically in the evening or night, they would be led to a sacred chamber called the abaton, a long colonnaded building designed specifically for this purpose. There, on stone or wooden benches, the supplicant would lie down to sleep. In the deepest part of the night, while the person was sleeping, Asclepius supposedly appeared to them in a dream. The god might appear as a radiant figure, or as a bright light, or sometimes in the form of a sacred snake. The snake was particularly associated with Asclepius as the symbol of medicine and healing in many cultures, with the image of a snake wrapped around a staff becoming the symbol of medicine that persists into the modern era. In the dream, Asclepius would touch the sick part of the person's body, or would perform surgery, or would prescribe a treatment. Some accounts describe the god performing actual surgical procedures within the dream. Others describe him administering medicine or herbs. Still others describe him simply touching the person or pronouncing them healed. Upon waking, the supplicant would report the dream to the priests and priestesses who staffed the sanctuary. The priests would interpret the dream, explaining what Asclepius had revealed, what treatment had been prescribed, what healing had been promised or initiated. Many supplicants reported that they were healed after such dream visitations. Stones inscribed with testimonies were set up at the sanctuaries, describing miraculous cures. These inscriptions, called iamata or remedies, served as public records of the healing power of Asclepius and as incentives for future pilgrims to seek healing at the sanctuaries. Dreams were also understood as a means through which the future could be predicted. Bad dreams, or nightmares, could be warnings of coming misfortune. A person might have a terrible nightmare and then resolve to avoid a particular course of action, only to learn later that following that course would have resulted in disaster. Such experiences would be understood as evidence that the dream was prophetic, sent as a warning by the gods or by other supernatural forces. Famous prophetic dreams appear throughout Greek mythology and history. When the Persian king Astyages had a dream that his grandson would overthrow him, the king tried to prevent this by ordering the child killed. But the child survived, grew to manhood, and eventually fulfilled the prophecy by deposing his grandfather. The dream's power lay in the fact that Astyages' efforts to prevent the prophecy actually ensured its fulfillment. When Hecuba, the queen of Troy, was pregnant with her son Paris, she dreamed that she gave birth to a burning torch. Seers interpreted this to mean that her son would bring destruction to Troy. And indeed, Paris would be the cause of the Trojan War. The events that would lead to Troy's fall and destruction. The dream was prophetic, not in showing the specific events that would occur, but in conveying the symbolic truth that this child would bring fire and destruction. The belief in the prophetic power of dreams was so strong among the Greeks that they developed practices intended to induce prophetic dreams. People would perform rituals before sleeping, asking the gods to send them dreams. They would sleep in sacred temples. They would take substances that might alter their consciousness or help them sleep more deeply. The dream books that circulated provided information about symbols and their meanings, helping people interpret dreams they had experienced. This kind of cultural engagement with dreams as a source of prophecy seems to have been widespread throughout Greek society. Among all the methods through which the ancient Greeks sought prophecy, perhaps the most desperate and most disturbing was necromancy, the practice of consulting the spirits of the dead. While most methods of divination involved consulting the gods or reading signs in the natural world, necromancy involved a direct and intentional journey into the realm of death itself, crossing the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead, to question those who had already passed beyond. The Greeks believed that when a person died, their soul or spirit continued to exist. It traveled to the underworld, to the realm ruled by Hades and his consort Persephone. There, the spirits of the dead existed in a kind of diminished state, separated from the physical body and from the immediate concerns of the living world. But the Greeks also believed that in death, something was gained, a kind of knowledge or perception that the living could not achieve. The spirits of the dead were understood to possess awareness of things beyond the veil of ordinary perception. They could see the future in ways the living could not. They could communicate with other spirits and with divine forces. They could offer advice and wisdom drawn from their experience in the underworld. Thus, if one could somehow bridge the gap between the living world and the dead, one could consult the spirits and gain their knowledge of what was to come. Temples dedicated to this practice, called necromantians or oracles of the dead, were established at several locations throughout the Greek world. The most famous was located on the border between Epirus and Acarnania, at a place where two rivers met and flowed into a deeper gorge. According to various ancient accounts, supplicants would arrive at this sanctuary seeking consultation with specific deceased people. They might want to contact a deceased family member, a legendary figure from the past, or even a divine being who had died and whose spirit resided in the underworld. The process of necromantic consultation seems to have involved several stages. The supplicant would first be prepared through ritual purification and fasting. They might abstain from certain foods or undergo ceremonial cleansing in sacred waters. Then they would enter the sanctuary, which was often built into or adjacent to caves and underground chambers. These underground spaces were understood as access points to the underworld, places where the boundary between the living and dead world was particularly thin and permeable. The darkness of the chambers, the underground location, and the very physical sensation of descending into the earth all reinforced the sense that one was approaching the realm of the dead. According to some accounts, the supplicants would undergo ordeals or experience hallucinatory states as part of the consultation. Some sources describe people being fed hallucinogenic beans before entering the sanctuary. Others mention elaborate theatrical effects designed to impress or terrify the supplicant. What seems certain is that the supplicants believed they were experiencing contact with the dead. They would report conversations with deceased individuals. They would receive messages, warnings, or advice allegedly delivered by the spirits. These experiences could have had a profound psychological impact, whether they were generated through theatrical effect, through hallucinogenic substances, through the power of suggestion and expectation, or through some combination of factors. The motivation for consulting the dead was often urgent. A person might seek to contact a deceased relative to ask for guidance about a decision. They might seek to contact a famous figure from the past to ask about future events. They might seek to resolve unfinished business or to gain answers to questions that seemed unanswerable in the world of the living. The consultation with the dead represented a kind of ultimate appeal, a reaching beyond the normal methods of divination to contact the spirits themselves. The practice of necromancy was not universally approved in Greek society. Some sources suggest it was illegal or considered transgressive. Yet it continued to be practiced, suggesting that the perceived benefits or the desperation of those seeking such contact was sufficient to overcome the social disapproval. In times of crisis or uncertainty, people might resort to necromancy even if they would normally have avoided it. As Greek civilization progressed, and as Greek merchants and scholars came into contact with the civilizations of the Near East and beyond, the Greeks encountered another method of understanding the future through the observation of the heavens themselves. The Babylonians and other Mesopotamian peoples had developed sophisticated systems of astronomy and astrology, systems that involve tracking the movements of celestial bodies and interpreting those movements as indicators of events on Earth and fates of individuals. The Greeks gradually adopted and adapted these systems, creating what would eventually become known as Hellenistic astrology. The fundamental belief underlying astrological practice was that the positions of celestial bodies at significant moments, particularly at the moment of a person's birth, determined or strongly influenced that person's nature and fate. The heavens were understood to be a kind of mirror or map of earthly events. The movements of the planets, the position of the sun and moon, the location of fixed stars, all of these corresponded to and influenced events in the sublunary realm of the earth. The Greeks inherited from Babylonian astronomy the idea of dividing the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun through the sky, into 12 sectors, each associated with a constellation. These 12 sectors became known as the zodiac, from the Greek word meaning procession of animals, referring to the animal symbols that represented the constellations. The zodiac signs became Aries the ram, Taurus the bull, Gemini the twins, Cancer the crab, Leo the lion, Virgo the maiden, Libra the scales, Scorpius the scorpion, Sagittarius the archer, Capricorn the goatfish, Aquarius the water bearer, and Pisces the fishes. As the sun traveled through its yearly cycle, it would appear to move through these 12 signs in sequence, spending approximately 1 month in each sign. The assignment of planetary rulerships to zodiac signs was another crucial development. Each of the 7 classical heavenly bodies, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, was understood to have particular influence over certain zodiac signs. The Sun ruled Leo, the sign most associated with authority and vitality. The Moon ruled Cancer, associated with emotions and intuition. Mercury, the planet of communication and intellect, ruled over both Gemini and Virgo. Venus ruled Taurus and Libra, signs associated with love and harmony. Mars ruled Aries and Scorpio, signs associated with aggression and intensity. Jupiter ruled Sagittarius and Pisces, signs associated with expansion and wisdom. And Saturn ruled Capricorn and Aquarius, signs linked to discipline and structure. Each of the classical planets was also associated with one of the Olympian gods. Jupiter, the Roman name for Zeus, was associated with expansion, wisdom, and rulership. Mars, Aries, was linked to aggression, war, and drive. Venus, Aphrodite, represented love, beauty, and attraction. Mercury, Hermes, embodied communication, trickery, and commerce. Saturn was associated with time, limits, and constraint. This mythological connection gave Greek astrology a richness of meaning. The planets were not merely mechanical bodies following mathematical laws, but expressions of divine principles and divine personalities. The Greeks refined the Babylonian system by introducing mathematical sophistication. Astronomers like Hipparchus, who lived in the 2nd century before the Common Era, created more precise methods for tracking planetary positions and predicting their future locations. Hipparchus made a crucial discovery. He found that the orientation of Earth's axis was gradually shifting, a phenomenon he called the precession of the equinoxes. This meant that the zodiac signs were slowly moving relative to the fixed stars. By understanding this precession, astronomers could create more accurate predictions of where planets would be at future times. The construction of a birth chart in Hellenistic astrology required several steps. First, the astrologer needed to determine the exact positions of the 7 classical planets at the moment of the person's birth. This required access to astronomical tables called ephemerides, which tracked the positions of celestial bodies at specific times. The astrologer would determine the person's birth date and approximate birth time, then consult the ephemerides to find out where each planet was located at that moment. Next, the astrologer would calculate the ascendant, the zodiac sign that was on the eastern horizon at the moment of birth. This sign was understood to have tremendous significance, as it represented how the person appeared to the world, their public presentation, and personality as perceived by others. The astrologer would also identify the midheaven, the highest point of the zodiac at the moment of birth, which was associated with career, public status, and reputation. The astrologer would then divide the zodiac into 12 houses, each associated with particular areas of human experience. The first house, ruled by the ascendant, dealt with personality and appearance. The second house dealt with money and possessions. The third with communication and siblings. The fourth with home and family. The fifth with creativity and romance. The sixth with work and health. And so on through the 12 houses. Each planet would fall into a particular house at the moment of birth, and the astrologer would interpret what this meant for that area of life. Finally, the astrologer would examine the aspects, the angular relationships between planets. Planets that were in harmonious angles to each other were understood to work well together, creating auspicious influences. Planets in challenging angles were understood to create tension or opposition in the person's life. A conjunction, two planets in the same position, had its own meaning. An opposition, planets 180 degrees apart, created tension. A square, planets 90 degrees apart, created challenge. A trine, planets 120 degrees apart, created harmony. These relationships between planets became part of the complex web of meaning that the astrologer wove together into a coherent interpretation of the person's nature and fate. The military sphere was one context in which divination achieved particular importance and influence. The Greeks understood warfare as fundamentally subject to the will of the gods. No general, no matter how confident in his strategy or his troops, would consider engaging in battle without first consulting the gods to determine whether the time was right and whether divine favor could be expected. The general would typically consult a seer attached to his army. This seer was often someone with significant prestige and reputation, someone who had demonstrated skill in reading omens and interpreting the will of the gods. The process of divination before battle typically involved sacrifice. An animal, usually a sheep or goat, would be brought to an altar. The animal would be killed according to proper religious procedures, and then the seer would examine the entrails, looking for signs that indicated whether the time was auspicious for battle. The liver would be examined first, looking for the particular features and patterns that indicated favorable or unfavorable omens. If the liver showed a favorable configuration, the seer might declare that the gods favored the battle. The general could proceed with confidence that divine blessing had been secured. If the liver showed inauspicious signs, the seer might advise delay or preparation of additional sacrifices. The famous Greek general Alexander the Great, who conquered the known world in the 4th century before the Common Era, was particularly attentive to omens and divination. According to historical accounts, Alexander regularly consulted his seer Aristander before military engagements. Aristander appears to have been deeply respected and influential, and Alexander seems to have genuinely trusted his interpretations. Whether we attribute this to genuine supernatural power or to Aristander's shrewd understanding of military circumstances and psychological factors, his prophecies seem to have influenced Alexander's decisions. The role of divination in war was so significant that it became woven into the Greek understanding of the conduct of war itself. Military strategists and tacticians would discuss the proper methods of consulting oracles and seers. Military manuals would specify how sacrifices should be conducted before battle and how the omens should be interpreted. A general who neglected to consult the gods before battle, or who received inauspicious omens but proceeded anyway, was not merely being reckless from a strategic perspective. He was committing a kind of religious transgression, risking the wrath of the gods. Having examined the various methods through which the ancient Greeks sought prophecy, we must now confront a paradox that is central to the very meaning of prophecy in Greek civilization. The methods appear to work. They are used consistently over centuries. They influence decisions. They shape history. And yet, again and again in the accounts that have survived, the prophecies are misinterpreted. The prophecies come true, but not in the way that was expected. The future, even when it is accurately foreseen, often arrives in a form that is both terrible and ironical. This tension between the reality of prophecy and its constant frustration through misunderstanding is not a bug in the Greek system of divination, but rather seems to be a feature. It is central to Greek understanding of the human condition and the relationship between mortals and the divine. The gods knew the future, but their knowledge was not a gift they gave freely to mortals. Instead, prophecy came wrapped in ambiguity, in riddles, in meanings that only became clear after events had already occurred. The story of Oedipus exemplifies this tragic pattern. Oedipus sought to escape his fate. His parents sought to prevent it. The priest Laius, his father, sought to avoid it. Yet every action taken to prevent the prophecy ensured its fulfillment. The prophecy was not reversed. It was not prevented. It came to pass precisely as stated, through the very efforts made to escape it. The knowledge of what was to come, rather than empowering those who received it, only deepened their tragedy. Similarly, Croesus, the wealthy Lydian king, sought guidance from the Delphic Oracle about whether he should attack the Persian Empire. He received a prophecy that if he crossed the river, a great empire would fall. He interpreted this to mean that the Persian Empire would fall to his forces. But when he crossed the river and was defeated, when his own empire fell to the Persians, the oracle explained that he had misunderstood. The prophecy had been accurate. A great empire did fall when he crossed the river. It was simply not the empire he had anticipated. This pattern appears over and over in Greek accounts. Priam, king of Troy, received a prophecy that his son Paris would bring about the destruction of Troy. He had the infant boy abandoned on a mountainside, but the child survived, was raised in hiding, and grew to manhood. When he returned to Troy, The prophecy was fulfilled precisely as stated. The prophecy could not be evaded. It could only be experienced with all its tragic consequences. The ambiguity of prophecy was not a flaw. It was the entire point. The gods' knowledge of the future was certain and unchangeable. But human understanding of prophecy was always partial, always subject to misinterpretation. The gap between divine knowledge and human understanding was precisely the space in which tragedy occurred. To know what was coming and to attempt to prevent it was to rush toward it. To resist fate was to ensure its fulfillment. This understanding created a particular kind of wisdom in Greek thought. If prophecy was certain but incomprehensible, if the future could not be changed but only misunderstood, then the proper response to prophecy was acceptance. The highest virtue was to receive prophecy with dignity, to understand that one's fate had already been written, and to meet what was coming with courage and nobility, rather than futile resistance. The tragic heroes of Greek drama are those who accept their fates, who understand that resistance is futile, and who endure with dignity. The pathetic figures are those who struggle, who rail against the gods, who attempt to change what cannot be changed. The system of divination that developed in ancient Greece exercised influence far beyond its original time and place. When the Romans encountered Greek civilization, they adopted and adapted Greek methods of prophecy. They built their own version of divination, influenced by Greek practices, but also incorporating ideas from other cultures. The Romans had their own oracles, their own seers, their own methods of reading omens. Yet these often bore the stamp of Greek influence. The Christian church that would eventually dominate the Mediterranean world explicitly rejected pagan divination. Consulting oracles came to be understood as a sinful practice, a rebellion against the Christian God's absolute sovereignty. Yet even as the formal practices of ancient divination fell into disuse and were condemned, the underlying human impulse to know the future persisted. Dreams continued to be understood as divine messages. Saints appeared to believers in visions. Miracles were interpreted as signs of God's will. The methods changed, but the deep human desire to peek behind the veil of time and know what awaited in the future remained constant. Today, when we examine ancient Greek divination with the tools of modern scholarship, we find ourselves confronted with mysteries that resist easy explanation. The Pythia's trance state was real. Chemical analysis of the water at Delphi has found traces of hydrocarbons that could have induced hallucinations. Yet the priestesses continued speaking and delivering recognizable prophecies, not random gibberish. The system of omens and bird flight interpretation seems bizarre to modern sensibilities. Yet it persisted for centuries and clearly seemed to work to the people who employed it. The system of astrology developed by the Greeks incorporated genuine astronomical knowledge and mathematical sophistication. Yet it also included elements that modern science would categorize as superstition. What becomes clear when we examine these practices is that the Greeks were grappling with fundamental human problems in human ways. They did not have modern meteorology, so they read omens in the weather. They did not have psychology, so they interpreted dreams as divine messages. They did not have access to modern medicine, so they sought healing in temples. They did not have reliable methods of decision-making under uncertainty, so they developed elaborate systems of divination to help them make choices. The ancient Greeks predicted the future through multiple interconnected methods, each one operating according to its own logic, each one reflecting different aspects of their understanding of how the divine and human realms interacted. They consulted priestesses who fell into trance states and spoke divine truth. They listened to the rustling of sacred oak leaves. They examined the entrails of sacrificed animals. They watched birds move through the sky. They waited for gods to appear in their dreams. They ventured to the edges of the underworld to question the dead. They studied the movements of the heavens. They read meaning into the most mundane occurrences. And through all of these methods, they maintained a cultural conversation with the divine, seeking to understand what the gods had planned, what fate had already written, and how they should live in accordance with what was to come. It was a system that did not predict the future as modern science understands prediction, but it was a system that provided meaning, guidance, and a sense that the universe was not chaotic and meaningless, but rather subject to divine order and knowable to those willing to seek that knowledge.